H-1B 2024 Unleashed, Mastering Nuances for Optimal Visa Utilization. It is great to have you here. We will be recording this. Any questions are not confidential. We welcome your questions in the Q&A panel. See, they already started trickling in. So we'll definitely, the more questions there are, then the more time we'll try to reserve at the end to go through everything. We're booked for an hour. And we're really excited to chat with you today, and thanks for coming here. So, hi, my name is Sophie Alcorn. I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration Law. I host the Immigration Law for Tech Startups podcast. I write for TechCrunch, and some of you may have come to some of my sessions last week in San Francisco at TechCrunch Disrupt. It was a lot of fun, massive tech conference with 10,000 people, so that was great. Based in the Bay Area, and excited to connect with all of you. And I'm joined here today by my amazing colleague, attorney Corey Faruqi, who has been a part of the Alcorn team for many years and is super passionate about helping our clients. So thank you for joining me today, Corey.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And our team is also, here in the background. If you're new to Alcorn Immigration Law, we are a team of dedicated professionals based across the United States. I'm in the Bay Area, but we have team members in New York and Texas. And so our coverage is really, we help people from anywhere in the world live and work legally in the United States. We focus on helping rapidly scaling technology companies, biotech, engineering, other professional companies, health companies, any companies that need the services or need to be founded by the world's most brilliant people. We are here, so we help with U.S. visas and green cards for individuals who are both currently in the United States and anywhere in the world. And we're a team of immigrants and children of immigrants and people married to immigrants. So it's very personal for all of us. So excited to share our H-1B knowledge with you today. And we're going to be covering a lot about H-1Bs, from many of the basics to some about the lottery, layoff coverage, cap gap, startup founder H-1Bs. So we're going to cover a lot. And this is really the first of our fall and winter webinar season with a focus on H-1Bs. We have monthly webinars, and you can subscribe to our newsletter to get the latest on all of our webinars. We invite you to, but we try to mix up the topics because we do more business-focused webinars like this one for established companies that have traction or runway, and they're hiring and growing, and they need to employ individuals on payroll like ASAP. And then we also have a lot of offerings for entrepreneurs and inventors and people trying to navigate the U.S. immigration system by themselves. So many resources, but this is the first in our fall lineup of H-1B webinars. So we're going to have another one soon solely on the H-1B lottery, which will be coming up in spring. So we'll be talking more about that. But this is conversational. We're happy to take your questions as we go, and we appreciate them rolling in. That's awesome. But Corey, why don't you just get us started off? What is an H-1B?
Yeah, so just some H-1B basics here. It is an employment visa that requires a specialty occupation. It typically requires a bachelor's degree or sometimes relevant work experience if the bachelor's degree isn't sufficient on its own. And then there's this prevailing wage requirement that depends on your geographic location and the type of work that's being done. I think we dive into this a little bit more on a couple of slides, but those are just some like general basics about H-1B requirements. I don't know if you want to go through.
So my dad was an immigration lawyer, and he used to talk about this as like the three-legged stool of an H-1B, and you need all three legs for the chair so you don't topple over when you sit down. And so these requirements, I think, have been in the law since the early 1990s. And And it's like our basic professional work visa in the United States. And so
Yes.
the company needs to be established and doing business and making money and able to pay the foreign national. It has to be a fair wage because we want to protect, Congress decided we want to protect American workers and foreign nationals from abuse by mean US companies. So we want to make sure that everybody is being treated fairly. So there's this prevailing wage. And then the person has to be qualified as a professional, and that has its own specialty occupation language in the H-1B laws and regulations, but it's essentially, do you have a bachelor's degree or do you have work experience?
Yeah, so someone might have like a foreign degree that is they completed in 3 years, where then they're going to need that related work experience to maybe bring it up to a 4-year US degree equivalent. So
yeah. Or sometimes people like dropped out of college, but then they worked for several years and we can get some sort of equivalency.
Exactly.
So you don't actually have to have a bachelor's degree. And you don't have to have, this is another misconception. People are like, well, my bachelor's degree is from another country, but that's completely fine. To qualify for an H-1B, you do not need, there's no requirement to have a US bachelor's degree. And then
yes, that's correct.
Another thing is sometimes people switch fields, like they studied English literature for their bachelor's and they're like, oh, I should be an astrophysicist. So they get a master's of science and then it's an astrophysics job, but we can't use their English bachelor's degree, but we can also, show the equivalence of their master's degree to that.
Yes, so yes, definitely.
We have ways to make it work.
Yeah, there's several ways for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so that's what an H-1B is. What's the maximum increment it's typically issued in, Corey? How long?
Well, you get so each H-1B visa is approved in a 3-year for 3 years. But there's a max of 6 years in H-1B time that people can typically hold.
Another key word.
Yeah.
There's always exceptions. Excellent. So just to recap it, we need a US-based company that's offering a specialty occupation to a professional candidate in order to make this work. And could you maybe talk a little bit about like, what is a specialty occupation? What jobs can work? How do you know?
So specialty occupation is, it can be very broad. So typically there's a lot of, I don't know, in my opinion, a lot of legal work involved here where we usually ask, especially some of our clients of what is their background, what's the job they're going for. And then we go into this database to find a specialty occupation that's going to align. So, there's a whole list of specialty occupations that are listed, and I think it requires like some analysis there.
What are some common examples of types of jobs that we often see that typically qualify?
Many engineering positions, like a whole host of engineering positions, mechanical, chemical. There's a bunch of sub-engineering positions where it's chemical and electrical. But we have done some, general managers, maybe someone who's in a COO role. We've used those occupations, as well as product managers, even sales engineers, which is like a little crossover between sales and engineering. So those are some of the most common ones that I see. I'm sure, Sophie, you've seen a lot more variety in the past.
Super broad too. I feel like this government database is endless. So
yes,
you could get it for a lawyer, you could get it for an architect. It doesn't have to be a Silicon Valley type job. I was looking up cryptographers today, and if they're mathematicians or IT specialists and I don't know, information systems, it can go either way. So a lot of this
it really can. Yeah.
Element. Yeah. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about the lottery. What is CAP? What is a lottery? Why is there a lottery? This sounds like a really silly system. Why?
Yeah, the lottery basically, it's it's called a lottery because there's a cap on the number of H-1B visas that can be issued every year. So you register for the H-1B cap, and then it is what it is. It's a lottery. They select people randomly, and they get to move forward with an H-1B petition. I think the lottery is capped at 85,000. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah. So,
yeah, the lottery is in spring, so this means we're starting now, frankly. Do you want to speak a little bit about what companies are doing now?
Yeah, companies are already reaching out to us actually to let us know who they're thinking about of entering into lottery. We allow people to reach out to us if we can do like a preliminary review just to see if there's any concerns there, and then companies can proceed with starting to collect documents and information for that candidate to enter them into the lottery. Okay. The lottery, it says it doesn't open until March, but we do like to prepare way in advance just so that we're ready to go. Because once it opens in March, it's kind of boom, boom, boom after that. So you want to have all those things prepared and ready to go. Any like concerns about like your education background and the job that you're seeking, we kind of want to iron some of those things out now so that you're ready to move forward once those lottery selections are made. Yeah. So I would say we start around December, January with really reaching out and solidifying who's going to be entered into the lottery.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few companies that even in summer were like, well, we know that we're going to be refiling for this list of candidates because they didn't get selected and they're an OPT or STEM OPT and they're going to have another chance and we definitely want to pursue it. The lottery didn't used to be electronic either. It was all paper based. So back in the day, we used to have to prepare the entire H-1B petition, all the forms, all the evidence, the LCA, the posting, the filing fees. The company had to be willing to commit all in, potentially thousands of dollars of filing fees. And they wouldn't know how many of their candidates would get selected. So I would have clients of like, I don't want our bank account to overdraw that day if everybody's selected. And I'm like, well, historically, the acceptance rate was such and such. But now it's a different system. It's all electronic. It's been out for like 3 or 4, maybe 5 years now. I don't know, but it's been great. It cost an employer like $10 to put an individual into the lottery. They were threatening to raise the price to like $279, which might happen at some point. And for a lot of our tech companies in the Bay Area and beyond, it doesn't really matter. It's like a latte in San Francisco. So
that's very true. Sophie, did you want to touch a little bit too on, I think this past lottery, people were entered multiple times and there might be some mechanisms now to prevent that from happening again.
Yes. Okay. So here's the deal. USCIS suspected collusion among companies for entering the same candidate multiple times. So they are currently investigating suspected wrongdoers for that. And I don't know if there are going to be fraud investigations. But the point is, as a company, you can enter one candidate one time. Do not collude with other companies on who you're putting in the lottery. The candidates are legally allowed to have multiple job offers from separate companies and be entered into the lottery more than once, but the companies shouldn't be helping to orchestrate that. So just if you're one company, put somebody in there once. And there were like almost 800,000 petitions filed this year in the electronic lottery in March, which was like mind-blowing numbers. Historically, there had been like 250, 300, 400K. And so we were all really scared in spring of like, why? Oh my God, there's a 10% acceptance rate. This is awful. But a lot of people got kicked out by the government, like their H-1Bs got rejected or denied because of this collusion thing. So once those duplicates or those candidates were eliminated or those companies were eliminated, and we had a second lottery this summer, it actually brought back the percentages to pretty normal rates. So there's about a 20 to 25% chance this year of being selected in the lottery when all is said and done. So that's been pretty consistent for the last decade or so. So I guess that's a warning and then good news that, you know, if you're playing by the rules, you have normal chances still of getting selected. Yeah. But you know, it's great to be organized. So as HR, you want to know your job title and your job description and your job duties and what you think you would like to be paying this person for this future role. And, you know, sometimes we need to talk about adjusting it, but that's fine. And if you're a candidate, then you always just want to stay organized with your Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever of your scans of all of your immigration documents and your I-20s and any DS-2019s and your visas and your I-94s and all of that personal immigration history, prior records from other companies, just so you have everything ready to go. So, all right, let's go. Okay. Oh, so
yes, this is like perfect segue into what's required for an H-1B filing.
So Corey, what are some of the things that need to get organized at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, Sophie touched on these a little bit already, but the job description. So for companies, whichever individual you're sponsoring, you know, you need to know what is the job they'll be doing, but on top of that, what are going to be their specific job duties? And then the minimum requirements for that job. So sometimes you might want to hire someone in a certain position, but you might not always have it in the job posting of like a bachelor's in this is required or a number of years of experience are required. So these are all things that are important to have written down and have knowledge on when you're looking to sponsor someone. Offer letter is usually needed as well. So this would include generally the job duties, benefits, salary that's going to be provided, expected start date. So, you know, in terms of like H-1B lottery, usually everyone starts on the same day more often than not. Yeah. But if it's like an H-1B transfer, so someone who's already in H-1B status and they want to transfer, or someone who is, when we touch on this a little bit, reactivating like an H-1B status, then the start date needs to be defined there as well. Financial documents. So these are financial documents for the company that is sponsoring the individual. So typically, you know, we want to show that you can pay the prevailing wage for the duration of the H-1B for that individual. So you need to be able to
let me touch on this a little bit.
Yeah.
Corey, because I know we have some aspiring startup founders on the webinar who are interested in doing like an H-1B transfer from their prior role to their future startup. And so and somebody asked, you know, when is the next conference? Because at the beginning I was talking about TechCrunch Disrupt and how I went there to give a bunch of speeches last week. But they're going to have another TechCrunch big thing in Boston in spring called Early Stage. So anyway, that'll be the next conference. But when I was there last week, one of the recurring questions I got was, Sophie, I never got venture capital funding. Can I still qualify for immigration? And I'm like, of course. What are you talking about? And so I think it's a really important topic to address here with respect to H-1Bs. Like for the last 10 years, since I started this law firm, interest rates were really low. The amount of capital flowing to early stage technology startups was really high. And if you had like a pitch deck and you were alive, you could often get money from venture capital investors to start your company. And so one of the reasons I wrote so much about like how early stage startups can get H-1Bs and get O-1s is because that was the weird immigration thing that I was solving, because USCIS was used to traditional brick and mortar businesses that had customers that paid money for services and products, and then they used the revenue to pay for their salaries. So it was really weird and unusual that we kind of like helped pave the way to get approvals for pre-revenue companies that weren't actually making any money yet. So that was like the thing that spurred me to write about all of that. But now all my articles tell people how to do it in that situation. So everybody's like, oh, it must be required to have venture capital funding to get a transfer approved. And I'm like, no, no, that was the exception. But because now a lot of early stage founders are like, oh my God, I have to get traction for 2 years before I can raise money from investors because the market's changed. Now they want to make sure we have customers and revenue before they'll invest. And they're like, can I still get immigration stuff done? I'm like, of course, that's like the old school traditional model. That's what the government's actually used to. You're like a real company that way. That's fine. So all of that is a really big preamble to just talk about the financial documents. It depends on your type of company. If you're like Series B and you've been operating for many years and you have a bunch of employees, we probably don't need that much financial information from you. If you're a really early stage company, but you have some customers, that's fine. For new companies or companies where it's their first time filing, there could be an RFE of like, hey, have you ever paid taxes? How much money do you have in the bank account? Can you actually pay the prevailing wage? But frankly, those RFEs are pretty rare. But we do want to, in good faith, of course, be able to show that your company will be able to pay the wage later. So it's very long-winded. And then on that note too, if you don't have customers and you haven't been around very long, how do we prove you're legit and not like a sham fraudulent company that somebody just slapped up in order to get some sort of immigration benefit, because that would be illegal. So that is why some additional company materials, if you don't have customers yet, can be helpful. We've used pitch decks successfully. If you're not reading yet, you don't need to like artificially manufacture a pitch deck. You could have a business plan. You could have a website. You could have infographics. You could have a booklet. Like, I don't know, people used to have flyers in the olden days and still do, right? So you can have your Instagram marketing campaign or something. So it just depends. The point is we'll show the viability of your company, whatever stage you're at and whatever type of company you're at. So, all right. Okay. And then this was a related question for this slide, I believe. Is the financial document section in the slide applicable for the employee or the employer? This is for the employer. This is for the company.
I would say this whole slide is really for the employer. The employee really is going to be showing proof of their education, experience, their status, immigration status in the US, passport, things of that nature. Yeah, so that's typically what employee is going to be providing for an H-1B application or petition.
Great. Awesome. Okay, so thank you for all of that. And then I see there's a lot of great questions, so we'll try to answer those throughout our slides. Okay. Since we're kind of going into many of the nuts and bolts of H-1Bs, first of all, so the lottery is one way to get an H-1B, but an H-1B transfer is another way to get an H-1B. So Corey, can you talk a little bit about an H-1B transfer first and what this grace period is and when it comes up and
so
how they might navigate this?
So an H-1B transfer is also known as a change of employer. So you might hear it that way as well. So yeah, H-1B transfer, change of employer, all the same thing. H-1B, though these H-1B transfers or change of employers typically happen when you are looking for new employment, and it's a little self-explanatory. You want to change your employer and still maintain your H-1B status. So you'd have a new company file a petition for you to transfer your H-1B status, your H-1B visa to that company. Here, I know this slide's telling you a little bit about the grace period. So if you were to lose your current employee.
We encounter this a lot. There was a lot of layoffs over the last year. I think a lot of those have subsided, fortunately, but a lot of startups that were hiring talent that was available was because of these tech layoffs that started happening about a year ago. And so a lot of people on H-1B were in a 60-day grace period if they had lost their jobs.
Yeah, and one of those things, obviously, to help with, or what they're doing to mediate that, is to find another company, right, to transfer their H-1B to work with that company. Just some points here, though, we have about minding the grace period deadline. So if you are laid off or you lose your job for any reason, keeping in mind first figuring out if you have a grace period. So you do need to have a valid I-94 card to be able to have that grace period available to you. And then during that grace period, you can continue to look for a job.
And there's something weird
Mhm.
about it too, Corey, which is if you actually got laid off on like your last day of having your normal 3-year H-1B, you don't get a grace period. You get 10 days of like a normal post H-1B grace period. So the 60 days only kicks in if your employment gets ended prior to the normal end of your H-1B petition, which obviously it does.
Which for many people, like you could locate that on your approval notice, those dates, if anyone's curious where to find those.
The I-797 will tell you the
and then on the bottom, it usually has an I-94 card with those details. So that you can find there. And then Sophie, I don't know if you want to touch on the B visa.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is something
period.
I think for companies hiring, one of the strategies over the last year that a lot of individuals used if they were on H-1B and they got laid off, and it's a really crazy experience to attempt to get a job in 60 days with like uploading your resume and hoping you're going to get through the job, whatever computer system that scans the resumes, and trying to get an interview and do multiple interviews and whatever, and get an offer and start your immigration. Like that's crazy for 60 days. So a lot of people just didn't have enough time, and they ended up filing a change of status to, and we'll talk a little bit about family H-1Bs and H-4s, but a lot of people tried to buy more time with a B status, which is visitor visa. So you're allowed to look for a job. USCIS clarified that last year, maybe because of one of the questions a certain lawyer may have asked somebody there on this call. So yay, victory, but they did clarify that you're allowed to search for jobs while on B status. So that's 6 months. Some people might have tried to renew it another 6 months. So it is possible to do an H-1B transfer for somebody currently in B status if they already went through the lottery, and you can reactivate their H-1B essentially. But you just have to be really mindful of deadlines. So if you're in HR and you're interviewing candidates, you can ask, do you require immigration sponsorship? Person will say yes or no. You're not allowed to discriminate based on national origin in the hiring process. So keep that in mind. But if somebody says, yes, I require immigration sponsorship, it's okay. It's perfectly okay to ask them, oh, what's your immigration status? When's the deadline? And that's when some of these nuances might come out. And that's where you want to be super mindful to talk to your immigration lawyer right away, so that if there are any looming deadlines, you're aware of them and you can get things done on time, because none of this is fast. And like, prioritize the LCA process. I mean, with this looming government shutdown situation, maybe Corey, you could talk about what is the LCA process and how this government shutdown might affect it.
Yeah, so with the H-1B, it does require that you have a certified LCA. So we do submit these applications with the Department of Labor through this online system they call the FLAG system. And it wasn't done this way in the past. So this is one of the first times where I believe this system would be shut down due to a government shutdown. So USCIS is not impacted by the government shutdown. They continue to operate, but this specific LCA process is under the government shutdown. It would be impacted by it. So it will then impact filing H-1Bs at the end of the day, because you have that to file with USCIS. So it's a little tricky situation.
If you are our client and you're working on an H-1B transfer right now and you've not responded to the email we sent about the looming government shutdown, please do so right away, because we're trying to prioritize getting all the cases filed with the LCA process so that nothing gets hindered in case of a government shutdown. So there's always something new to look at in immigration law. Is never
I think there's one question here, like, is the grace period of 60 days for entire life or reset every 3 years?
Answer that one live. Yeah, you want to take that?
Yeah, so the 60-day grace period does reset after each, like if you were to be let go of 2 jobs, right? For after the end of each job, it will reset.
Yeah. So if you get laid off, you have a 60-day grace period. If you do an H-1B transfer and you start working again, and then you, God forbid, but you get laid off again, then you have a 60-day grace period.
Yeah.
All right. Great. Okay. And then now this is becoming a thing again because the world is reopened and people can travel, which is great. So there's this whole thing of like H-1B recapture, and Corey, you alluded to the typical 6-year maximum.
Mhm.
So what is this recapturing of unused time on H-1B about?
Yeah, essentially any time in that 6-year period that you've been abroad, so and as long as it's a 24-hour day that you've spent abroad, you can recapture that time. So if someone's taken a 3-week vacation, they can recapture those 3 weeks, a 3-week vacation abroad, let me just clarify that, out of the US, and they can recapture those 3 weeks of H-1B time that they didn't use. So even though you're still employed, you didn't use that time
You
working in
got
the
to be
US.
so careful about counting dates in immigration law.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I'm just going to share this little anecdote. This is anonymous, but I was talking to somebody yesterday who like miscalculated, like didn't realize that when they were flying from Europe to New York, they would lose a day. So they went on they had a 30-day national interest exception booked like in the pandemic, and they were flying to JFK. And their flight arrived one day after their visa expired, and they were like the only person in the airport arguing, and and like
Yeah,
intense lockdown. And fortunately they got let in, but they'd already been through that waiver process before, and because of the date miscalculation with the time zones and the flight. So just really want to be careful with
I think that's
immigration
really
law.
important point because yeah, time zones, unpredictable delays. Like if
Yeah,
you can avoid it, avoid it. Don't put your
optimize for peace of mind.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, I have this conversation a lot in the past with people. It's a totally different topic, but like applying for citizenship. Like you don't want to
right,
barely qualify for something.
right,
Ideally, you give yourself
right,
some room.
right.
So, but yeah, you can count these days up. People use their I-94 record, which you can obtain online. Sometimes the system's really great. Every now and then it's not great. So make sure you're keeping track of like plane tickets, your own records of your travel dates and when you've traveled abroad. So that would be my little tip there because the
And
I-9.
then when a company is like transferring in an employee who previously had an H-1B elsewhere, and we're like, oh my gosh, they've had their H-1B for almost 6 years. How much time can we get? Then we do the analysis of, oh, how much time was abroad? What can we recapture on this next H-1B? And then there's like an additional nuance of like, oh, where have they been in the green card process? And can we potentially get
Mhm.
H-1B extensions beyond the 6 years?
Yeah, and this H-1B timer capture, this applies to cap subject
Yep.
H-1B, so not cap exempt, that's different. You need to have activated your H-1B, so even if you had an approval for an H-1B, but if you didn't actually enter on the H-1B or you never worked for that company on the H-1B, then you didn't actually activate that H-1B. So in that situation, you may have to go through the lottery again. And then there's also another term out there called the remainder option. So it's similar, but but some differences, I guess, is the way it's discussed as remainder is more along the lines of someone who previously had H-1B and is looking to come back and work on that H-1B if they have time still from those 6 years.
And I'll just add another twist. There's this other variation where people got an H-1B in the lottery, and they were going to go pick up the visa through consular processing, but they never did. And then their job changed, and maybe they had valid OPT at the time. So there's a way to try to reactivate those unused
Yeah.
H-1Bs for future employers as well. Oh, wait a minute. That was, no, go back. Not ready yet. Okay. Sorry. But now we know how many slides we have, and we have another 20 minutes where we can take questions, which is great because we got a lot of questions. But let's also talk about this. We alluded to like layoffs, but also startup founders. How can you talk a little bit about H-4 work permits? Like what's an H-4 and
Yeah, so with the layoffs, we've talked to many people whose spouses happen to also be H-1B visa holders and have an approved I-140, which is a very important detail. You do need to have your spouse needs to have an approved I-140. who've been able to change their status from H-1B to H-4 during their grace period and get a work permit. So the approved I-140 for the work permit specifically. You can go to the H-4, but you do need the approved I-140 for work authorization. So this is helpful, or this was helpful for people who, needed to continue working to support their family, even though they're laid off and still looking for another job. Let me see here. Also, what I wanted to say, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but
No, I mean,
yeah.
I'll just add to that, if somebody's deciding how they want to maximize immigration security for their family and they're married and it's like a two professional household, then it's kind of great if both people have independent H-1Bs. It's lovely that the H-4 EAD exists, but if you have the option to get your own H-1B, it gives you guys more security. And then you always have the fallback option of the H-4 EAD. There's no premium processing for an H-4 EAD. So if you just spontaneously decide to quit your H-1B job and do a change of status to H-4 and apply for an EAD, it could take many, many months to get your work permit. So that's important for startup founders considering this. But if you file it in conjunction with an H-1B job change for your working spouse who's being sponsored, and they have some sort of location or salary amendment, and then you're choosing premium processing for them, then the spouse gets the benefit of some faster processing for their work permit.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes founders use it, right? So you could start a company on an H-4 EAD, and then if you had your own H-1B, you could choose to reactivate it, or you could try to go to O1 if you're from India, maybe, and then you want to try to get an EB1 later. So there's lots of creative ways to use these.
Yeah, and the benefit of the H-4 EAD is there's not so many restrictions on what your employment, basically, where you get to work and all of that. So
yeah, no prevailing wage, no job categories, no sponsorship. You could be self-employed.
Your job doesn't have to align with your education.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Yeah. Nice. All right, cool. I mean, you could sell pottery, you could do anything. So, all right. Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so from here, now we get to go to your all of your lovely questions. We have a good chunk of time reserved, so we can get through those. And I'm going to also leave you with our book and our QR code for if you'd like to get in touch with us and schedule a consultation. So you're always welcome to reach out. We're happy to offer complimentary consultations to people from companies. Do get on our email list so you can get all of our updates hey, I just wrote a book and released it and it just got published and it became a bestseller on Amazon, and immigration law books and practical guides for law. So holy cow, now I'm a book author. When did that happen? So yeah, we try to have a lot of resources and make this all as friendly and approachable as possible. So with that, let's take the questions. Let's just start from the top. And if you have more, I think we have ample time. So if you want to get a few more in there, we can totally do that. Corey, do you know about compelling circumstances EAD cards? I believe that's for F1 students who are
this is a new EAD card. We don't have much practical information on how these are being processed, but I think the question here is, can you launch your startup while you're waiting for your EAD? So if you don't have work authorization, you can take a passive role in launching your startup. You won't be able to engage in any work that would give you compensation. Sylvia, I don't know if you want to add a couple more things that you think would.
I am not I think I was wrong. Actually, it's not for students. This is actually for people on work status. So potentially if you've been recently laid off. So I would say that launching a startup, this goes back to without employment authorization, you can own a business, but you can't work there. You don't want to do anything that's considered work until after your EAD is approved and arrives. So you could, I think the order of operations that typically works best is be a crazy researcher in your laboratory and maybe you'll stumble on an invention. And then if you're gonna monetize it and turn it into some sort of job, then it's best to wait until you have work authorization and to incorporate as late as possible and close to the date when you have work authorization as possible, because you don't want long swaths of time where the company exists and you're not allowed to work because you're waiting for work authorization. So, but yeah,
You can start.
all right. This is from the company perspective and maybe from a candidate who's planning on joining in February. So how long does the company need to prepare for sponsoring an H-1B candidate? Let's say if I join in February, we offer normal H-1B lottery fees typically through the middle of February to start putting new candidates in the lottery. But after that, we start charging expedite fees because it's not that it's a complicated process, but the volume and the project management can become a lot. And we really want to give deference to our client companies that sign up early, and make sure that everything goes smoothly for all of our clients. So if you're talking to some company about a start date in February, they could, and you're talking to them now, I mean, they could put you in the H-1B, they could plan to put you in the H-1B lottery. And we could initiate that with them now, even if you're not starting your job until February of 2024. So often companies put, they'll do some like fall on campus hiring, on campus recruiting thing with students. So they'll know who's going to join in May or June or July for their summer cohort. So you could put in current students if you know they're going to graduate and work with you in the spring after the lottery. So there's a lot of flexibility, but the more notice you can give your immigration lawyers, the better. Okay. Oh, this is a theme of the week, Corey. We're getting this one a lot.
Yeah.
I'll be a 100% owner. 3 partners are dropping out of a startup where I am the sole employee on H-1B status. What are some steps to consider to be compliant with my status? Example, establishing the employer-employee relationship, etc. Thank you so much. So it sounds like there were 4 co-founders. One of them got an H-1B, and the H-1B founder wants to continue with the company, but the other founders don't. So this person is going to solely take over the company. So there is this new wonderful USCIS website guidance that says that the old stuff where we used to talk about minority ownership and a board and they can outvote you and you can be fired and all of that, the new website says that none of that is actually required. And as long as you're on payroll, that's sufficient to have an employer-employee relationship. So you might be fine. You want to make sure that you're still going to get pay stubs, and that your job information isn't changing. Any other red flags you can spot there, Corey? I mean, maybe this person needs like a one-on-one consultation.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be a good idea, but I think what you said covers it really of what the new guidance is that as long as you can be fired and that can be demonstrated, it should be okay.
Yeah, I don't even know if you would need an amendment. I mean, we would want to take a look at your prior H-1B and what you were hired for, and then we want to talk to you about what you think the company will now do and your role in it. I mean, maybe you can qualify for an O1 and you just want to switch to that at this point, and then you can just be the CEO and have a lot more flexibility. So there's different options. Okay. What are some of the challenges and costs that small companies of less than 20 employees face when sponsoring H-1B candidates, and what does that imply? Corey, do you want to take this?
I mean, yeah, cost is really, I mean, so
sometimes they worry about cost. sometimes they work
Yeah.
for provability.
Yeah, so I mean the cost is it's gonna include legal fees if you hire an attorney to support with that, and then the government filing fees. So as far as like financial costs, those are typically the financial costs with submitting an H-1B petition, but sometimes the smaller companies, like let's say that is fully remote, sometimes we recommend having like an office space that isn't somebody's home, depending on the situation, right? So that might be like an additional cost.
Oh, or at an early stage, it can be super haphazard. Like they use the owner's house for the Delaware
Yeah.
incorporation, and then they didn't register the California Secretary of State yet. And then they have a just mailing address, but then they go work at a coffee shop, and then they do research in a lab, and then
Exactly.
and there's all these addresses. So
there's all these
yeah.
other, yeah, there could be additional costs that aren't necessarily anticipated or included in like the legal fees or the government filing fees. These are costs that you need to put
we might
together
need
a
like
strong petition.
an educational evaluation, if depending on
Yeah,
the
it can be
like
education. Yeah, so these are like the additional costs that we see happen sometimes, and depending on the company and their budget, if they can actually include all of that for any given time.
Super measured and even keel and wise. I think there's a lot of fears that are also out there that are not true. Like, I am not a Mang or a Fang, giant tech company. I therefore don't think I can get an H-1B approved, but that's not true at all. We can get H-1Bs for one-person companies, three-person companies, for the first employee. You can get it before you have any paying customers. So that's not true. And there's no benefit to the company's size in your percentage chance of being selected in the lottery. And big companies might have like more established corporate immigration programs. So that could make it easier for the candidate. But if you're looking for getting a job at a small company that works with us, we will make sure they're well taken care of in your immigration process. And I would say that's another thing on that. Like sometimes small companies, if it's their first immigrant hire and maybe they don't have an HR person yet, or maybe their HR person also does operations or finance and they haven't encountered the US immigration process before, they might just be unfamiliar. But I would say one of the ways in which we shine is we have this like really boutique offering that doesn't assume that you have your own internal like global mobility program. And we work with a lot of people ops individuals who are tasked with coordinating immigration at a company, but they have no idea because they've never done it before. So we're really happy to help in those situations. Okay, I think we covered this. There are like 800,000 applicants. Initially, there was a 10% selection rate. Ultimately, it's like 20 to 25%. Okay, I think we've covered this a lot. But maybe do you want to take a stab, Corey, about how to launch a startup on H-1B?
Yeah, so if you're launching a startup and you want your startup to sponsor you on H-1B, we typically, I'd recommend a consult. We can go into more details, but typically, you want to make sure that you have that employer-employee relationship, you have the financial means, the company has the financial means to support your H-1B and pay the prevailing wage for those 3 years, and then that you can show that you're actively doing business. So what we already discussed earlier about the pitch deck and maybe the website, things of that nature.
Yeah, and we do individual consultations all the time, and we normally charge fees for Corey's time and my time because we're busy lawyers and have a lot of demand on our plates, and we want to be valued for our experience and wisdom and how it applies to you. Sometimes we can comp those fees, but at most having a conversation is going to be a few $100s about this, and we can figure it out with you. Okay, what kind of startups can qualify for an H-1B? Many types of businesses in any industry, just a established, functional, good faith, real US business that's, registered and compliant with taxes and local business registration requirements. Doesn't matter what vertical or industry, e-commerce, absolutely fine. It's more that the role requires some sort of professional background in your field. Okay. Oh, we have 13 questions in 8 minutes. All right. Okay, great. I guess everybody's listening when I said more questions, more questions.
Yep.
Okay. After your after your change of status from F1 to H1B from within the United States with an I-129 approved by USCIS, okay, does the H1B visa interview have to be taken in a specific embassy specified in the Part 4 processing information of its address section of the I-129? No. Or can the DS-160 be sent to another embassy or consulate within your country of citizenship? Yes. Or you could even do your interview in a third country if they'll accept you, either based on residence or they're just open to third country nationals. If you know where you want the interview to be scheduled, you should specify it because it'll make things easier. But we've had lots of situations where people have to go somewhere else for some reason.
Yeah, and if you're going somewhere else, you can always contact that embassy or consulate. Sometimes they're very responsive to the applicants reaching out themselves to collect information. So yeah.
Great. And they've all tried to increase their processing times in the last few years.
Yeah.
Okay. If I can get a job in, for instance, February, can my company get a chance to file the H-1B? Yeah, it's kind of late. So if you can get a job in January or at least get the offer, signed in January, that would be great. So they have more time to hire us to do your H-1B. Okay. If someone is on an H-1B with an I-140 approved with a prior employer and they get laid off, they are not able to get a job in the 60-day period to switch to their spouse's H-1B as an H-4, let me clarify. So they switch to their spouse's H-1B as an H-4. So if you're like in some sort of change of status from H-1B to H-4 and it's pending and you're interviewing, can you switch back to an H-1B without the lottery? And do you have to leave the country? And then how open are employers to that? Do you want to take that?
Yeah, so you don't have to enter the lottery again. Once you've been selected once, then you're good. And it's not necessary to leave the country. You can do a change of status from H-4 back to H-1B. That shouldn't be an issue.
But, there's just this timing thing because the H-4 could take months, but then the H-1B could take 2 weeks with premium processing. Ultimately, you want to make sure that every link in the chain was approved.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think employers are pretty open. I think it is like a type of H-1B transfer. The only difference is if you're not currently in H-1B status, you can't start working when USCIS receives the petition. You have to wait for the petition to be approved. So premium processing would become more necessary in that situation. But if the employer isn't willing to cover premium processing, that's like one of the things that you can cover as a beneficiary for an H-1B. Can you talk more about EB-1A and EB-2 self-petitions? This is from the perspective of filing a perm for someone who has an H-1B, but also a majority owner of their startup. If your company wants to hire an employee and they have, typically the corporate immigration process is EB-2 or EB-3 with perm, but there are many paths up the green card mountain. If somebody's trying to get a green card through their own company and they have a lot of equity, that might mean that they are foreclosed from the perm process, which is one of the reasons we often look at an EB-1A for extraordinary ability or an EB-2 national interest waiver green card. We are going to have an upcoming webinar on those types of green cards. So that information will get published soon, and we have a lot of resources on our site about that. Oh my gosh. Okay.
I think they're answering some of their own questions here.
Great. Okay, I'll try to get through them. Great. When a startup is pre-revenue, is there some sort of minimum cash amount in the startup's financial statement that's recommended to approve ability to pay? I mean, once I did it with like 60K in the bank account that was friends and family money, and like the H-1B just got approved. So it's more that if there's an RFE, then we want to have evidence predating the date of the application to show the viability. But I even did one once where the startup had like 10K in the bank and but they had letters of intent from customers who wanted to start using the product as soon as they could build it. And we had a business plan, and I was able to convince USCIS to approve it for 1 year at least. And then we got a 3-year renewal. So it's like whatever you can make work. If someone's on an H-1B, in which year of the H-1B should a person start the green card process through an EB-2 to continue working after 6 years? I mean, until which year can we delay the green card process? A few years ago, companies were doing this like in parallel with an H-1B transfer for coveted candidates. I think the job market's changed a lot. I think it's a good idea to start working on this shortly after the first 3-year H-1B renewal. But I think that a lot of companies who want to have like best practices for team retention and wellness and mental clarity and ability to focus and increase their efficiency, they try to consider this sooner so that they can help their employees have more peace of mind, and then they want to stay longer.
Yeah.
Are the conditions you mentioned for employer-employee relationship for the same for STEM OPT? No, it's a completely different.
Not exactly.
Talk about that separately later if you want to get in touch. We'll reach out. I'm happy to help you. Does the chance of getting the H-1B picked depend on the reputation of the company? No, it's just random, and but the chance of getting approved depends on your company's strength as an employer. Can you be employed by a relative's company on an H-1 or STEM OPT? Yeah, there's no rules against it. I got somebody's mother-in-law, chemical engineering H-1B once to build a makeup company for him, so that worked. How do you prove hire fire authority if you're the only owner at your startup? That is the new website guidance. So if you want to do this, please reach out to us for a consultation and we'll figure it out for your individual startup situation. How do you recommend pursuing the O1 path as backup for the H-1B? If so, how long should I allocate for self-sponsored type of visa? I hope a lot of Stanford students get O1 visas because they want to be self-employed or or just have multiple projects or make money when they're students. And so you can get an O1 based on non-work accomplishments even before you graduate with a degree, as long as you demonstrate some sort of expertise in a field. I had one like insane founder become qualified for extraordinary ability in like 6 relentless weeks of grueling work. It depends on your motivation, your procrastination level, and your connections and how badly you want it. I would say like we have an online class. Alex, if you could please share the link to Alcorn Academy Extraordinary Ability Prep. It's our 15 module online class that I recorded of how anybody can become qualified in your own field for an O1, an EB1A, or an EB2 NIW. So I think that takes about 8 weeks to get through sanely. So hopefully that'll give you some idea. Thank you for the comment. Yep, funds to pay for 3 years. That's a function of the wage level and the geography. Part-time concurrent H-1Bs. Is it still possible for a startup to sponsor a part-time H-1B but without the concurrent part? Yeah, you can get somebody yes, we do this a lot, especially for early stage. So like founders and founding engineers. Hey, we have to do an H-1B transfer, but we're only going to have you work 25 hours a week. I mean, we've gotten an H-1B, we get H-1Bs approved all the time for 5 hours a week, but that's because we know we're going to do 2 of them at the same time. I would say if it's the only job, you have to show that this person is going to be able to survive wherever they're living. So, okay. And then last question, if I get a job after March 1st, which I think is the H-1B deadline, does it mean I lost a chance of H-1B filing? The lottery is always open for different 2-week periods, sometime in the middle to the end of March. So as long as the company can get you in by that time, even if you haven't started yet, you can be included. Okay, well, that wraps it up. Oh my goodness, we did it. Oh, wait, what? One more. This is gonna be our last question. CAOO for e-commerce company for a new startup, but we don't have revenue yet. Can I apply for an O1? Yeah, many of my clients who want to be founders do the H-1B if they have to, because they urgently need to accept money from customers or venture capitalists. Other than that, if somebody has a little more breathing room and some accomplishments, they usually try to get out of H-1B land and into O1 land to give them a little bit more entrepreneurial flexibility for their pursuits. And yes, the O1 does not require revenue. Okay, that is it. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody, for attending and listening today. We really appreciate you being here.